Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams. You know, I don't know if I've ever witnessed anything in my life on American soil as devastating as watching California, Los Angeles, just burned to a crisp. And there are some more dire warnings coming from the Weather Service that the strong winds are returning. And just when the people in the City of Angels thought they were getting a reprieve, it's being predicted that it could be much worse. I mean, it looks like a war zone. It looks like someone dropped an atomic bomb there. I mean, the area that has been destroyed is bigger than the city of Paris. And I don't know about you, I've just been so overwhelmed with sadness just to watch, because I was talking to friends of mine whose family members' homes burned down, family members are homeless. And what's even more devastating is how business owners and people who have control over real estate, and then people who manage hotels, are gouging these people. Places that you could rent, which is normally $3,000 a month, has skyrocketed to $7,000 a month. In order to rent a place now where you normally pay $1,500, you're paying $4,000 a month. I mean, everybody is just gouging these people, gouging this city. I mean, it's almost inhumane to think that businesses could be so cold and so insensitive to the plight of people as they face probably one of the most devastating crises in their lives. Joe Paul is joining me on for this edition of the show. Joe, welcome to the broadcast. Joe?
Can you hear me? Great to be here.
I guess they'll tell me when he's in the queue, but it's just the devastation. Joe, are you there?
Testing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, well, just the devastation is just uncanny. You know, none of us ever know what we'll come to in life, and we all know that Los Angeles is prone to fires and earthquakes and those devastations. But man, something like this is just beyond the pale. And how do you help people in a situation like this? How do you get them resources and funds where you know it's going directly to help the victim? And boy, I mean, we ended 2024 with these hurricanes and that devastation. And boy, January, we faced the terrorist attack in New Orleans, and now you have these fires that are just burning out of control with no end in sight. And these winds are just angry. It's just like the winds are angry, and everything is going up in smoke. And then even the game where the Los Angeles Rams were hosting the Minnesota Vikings for the first round playoff game tonight had to be moved to Arizona because of smoke inhalation. And you just think about the senior citizens and others who have health issues. They have to live from the smoke and just all these other things that are just crowding.
I can hear him well, yes.
The environment is just really, I'm telling you.
You hear me?
It's just so, I got to tell you, man, you just got to keep in your prayers. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Armstrong.
Man, I know you know someone that has lost their way of life, lost their home, who've been devastated by what we're witnessing from a distance away. It's just got to be, I mean, I don't know, like I just said earlier, you probably didn't hear me, I've never seen anything like it, Joe.
Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, it's disaster after disaster, Armstrong. The California wildfires it's a stark reminder of the challenges that we face with climate change, right? As we think about these fires, I don't know about you, but it seems like it's getting worse and worse, right? And they've caused devastating losses. People are losing their homes. They're losing literally everything. And I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know how many folks would be paying as much attention now that some stars and superstars are losing their homes. And so this is just, it's tough. I'm proud of the administration for actually stepping up and supporting California and giving them taking care of 100% of the costs to support the battle of the wildfires from the Biden administration for the next 180 days. And I'm hoping that President Trump takes that under consideration.
You know, Bradley, you're not joining the conversation. You know, Joe just mentioned climate change. Do you think this is all about climate change, or just the sometimes it's where we stay, where we make our bed and we make our lives, and California is just prone to these kinds of natural disasters, whether it's earthquakes, whether it's fires. We saw the recent earthquake in Japan and the damage that it brought on within the last 24 hours. I mean, obviously, but nothing at this level. And then I haven't even gotten to, because I didn't want to start with the blame game, Bradley, talking about Gavin Newsom and the millions of dollars they cut from the budget for firefighters. They cut so much of the staff because many of them did not have the COVID shot, and it was mandated that they were vaccinated. In the mayor of Los Angeles advocating cutting the budget by $23 million, and they advocated, they finally compromised at 17. Gavin Newsom was on Face the Nation on Sunday talking about the fact that he's launching an investigation to see why there was not water in many of the fire hydrants. What's your perspective on all this, Bradley?
Yeah, Armstrong, thank you for having me tonight. And it's apropos to be talking about this because I've got family in Southern California right now. That's where I was born and raised. I've been in constant contact with a lot of family and friends there. And of course, your prayers and your thoughts are always welcome in that community. So thank you for those. Three things. Yes, of course, I think we can acknowledge some of the challenges created by changing climate, whether that's natural or man-made. And of course, California is kind of this center of all these different natural forces that we see acting so powerfully on a more habitual basis, specifically with wildfires. I mean, this is, gosh, I can't even, it feels like every week I wake up and I get a call from back home saying that there was another earthquake or wildfire. And I think for a lot of folks back home, whether they're firefighters or they're members of the community, they say, yes, of course we could be doing more, but it doesn't need to be, you know, climate change as a political conversation is so loaded, and people jump instantly to Green New Deal, and everyone has their, you know, extreme perspectives on what to do about the environment, whether to just disregard it completely or to, you know, completely change our economic order, upend our kind of system of governance to protect the climate. I think the perspective of people in local California communities, and I think the perspective of most Americans, is there's common sense things that we could be doing, just like, as you mentioned, not cutting fire budgets when the state has been plagued by wildfires that have been getting out of control, doing common sense forestry management, making sure that when you're going out into nature or into your community, that you're not doing anything that risks, you know, the start of a fire, right? Because we found out with the Camp Fire, for example, a few years back in Northern California, that was a man-made fire that was a result of poor forestry management and a drought. And so I think there are things that we can do that are just such common sense policies that municipal and local and state governments should be enacting to really help bring down the cataclysmic cost. I mean, this is Armageddon level costs of these type of disasters, and it's absolutely terrible to see.
So how do we, Bradley, because I know this is where you were born, how do we help? How do we make sure that we get resources to them? And when do you think they will ever get relief? And how much more devastation can they handle? I mean, you can see that the firefighters, everybody is just so overwhelmed right now. They're at their wits' end.
Yeah, definitely. The folks that I know who are fighting these fires, I mean, they're at their wits' end because this is the result of years going back and forth with state and municipal governments about those budget cuts that we mentioned recently, about the type of forestry management that we wish to be put in place. I would encourage you guys to go out and find charities operating in the area that you feel comfortable entrusting your hard-earned dollars with to help the victims, whether that's personal GoFundMes that you find on social media, or that's places like the Red Cross or other nonprofits going out there, putting people on the ground, making sure that people have food, shelter, and resources and the like. But definitely think that that should be, as you mentioned, the Biden administration coming in and covering some of those costs. We definitely hope that that continues under the Trump administration. And I think the Trump administration was a vocal supporter, many Republicans in Congress as well, of providing that disaster aid relief in the previous spending bill. And I think as we see government spending fights continue, that disaster aid is now going to include funds for victims of the California wildfires as well.
You know, Joe, this is what I cannot wrap myself around, is that in the middle of all this, you have these illegal immigrants with blowtorches and arsonists trying to start other fires. And I say to myself, how in the world, when these people have been so devastated, and you've got these people, these sickos, these head cases out here trying to start a fire? I just don't understand it.
It's insane. I mean, it's absolute insanity. I mean, it's one of those things where, you ever let somebody into your house and then they just don't take care of your house, right? It's problematic. Or they don't take their shoes off or whatever rule you have a part of your house. This is an incredible country. And if you're allowed in, right, you ought to take care of it. I mean, what's happening could have been prevented. It absolutely could have been prevented. But we shouldn't just stop. And Bradley mentioned the better need for forest management. When we think about these wildfires and the climate pressures that these infrastructures just clearly just can't withstand, coupled with the immigration issues that we're having as a country, I mean, we're at pretty close to overloading pressure where we're ready to explode. I'm hoping that we can make a quick turnaround in the next 30 to 60 days, but these fires don't seem like they're slowing down.
Just by the grace of God, it's not us. We just sit back and watch, and as much as we talk about it, we can't even come close to relating to what these people are going through. Many deaths, thousands of buildings destroyed, schools destroyed, homes destroyed, and we like to focus on these fancy mansions of Hollywood, but there are just so many ordinary people who barely make ends meet that just lost their way of life. Homeless, where are you housing these people? Where are they to go?
Exactly.
This and much more when we return on Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. And welcome back. Bradley Devlin is the political editor at the Daily Signal, and Joe Paul is executive director of Black Men Vote. You go from one situation to another. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but it's so crazy, it's so insane when you think about how people are struggling and barely making ends meet in these major metropolises. New York City is now being mocked, I mean literally mocked, nationwide after they were given the go-ahead by the Biden-Harris administration and implemented their new preposterous congestion pricing scheme. Now, for those of you that don't understand what a congestion pricing scheme, if you live in New York or travel to New York and you want to enter Manhattan, you either have to pay an exorbitant amount of money to take a cab, you have to pay up to $13 per person each way to take the train, or you have to pay $9 per car just to enter Manhattan. And I ask you this question, does this make any sense to you? And wait a minute, if somebody wants to take a quick drive into Manhattan to go to their favorite deli, I said deli, they have to tack on an extra $9 on the price of their sandwich. Yes, The restaurants must tack on an extra $9. Congestion pricing in New York City wouldn't be so bad if the cost to use public transportation was actually affordable. A family of 5 looking to take the Long Island Railroad or New Jersey Transit into Manhattan could pay upwards of $50 for tickets for each member of their family, not round trip, but each way. Each way, $50 for tickets for each member. And if you want to use the subway or buses in the city, since they won't have a car, well, tough luck. Because on top of congestion pricing, New York City is also planning to raise their subway fees to $3 per ticket. $3 a ticket. And let's not forget that you still have to risk being pushed on the track, assaulted, or set on fire while you take the subway. Let's just call congestion pricing what it is, Bradley and Paul. Let's just call it what it is. It is a cash grab and a tax on the poor. A person who works a minimum job in Manhattan, who of course can't afford to live in the city because rental prices are so absurdly high, will now have to spend more than half of their hourly wage after taxes just to get to work every day. Now, we'll see. I know the Trump administration met. I know they said they want to reverse these business fees. They want to stop these businesses from shutting down and exploiting the poor. I mean, but listen, Joe Paul, what sense does this make?
It doesn't make any sense at all. One of the biggest points of contention is the perception of inequity, Sean. You know, everyday New Yorkers, especially essential workers and small business owners, are being asked to shoulder this financial burden while some city officials don't even have to pay it, right? And they publicly support the plan. They're exempt from paying it because they use NYPD vehicles, and that's problematic, right? Economically, the ripple effects are also concerning. When you look at industries like food or beer or beverage delivery, they're already bracing for an increased cost, and those costs are passed down to the consumer. A $5 rise in the price of a keg, for example, translates to way higher prices for consumers. And so this plan, I think, just like you mentioned, is a huge cash grab. To add complexity to that, President-elect Donald Trump has openly criticized the plan, right? And he says he's going to eliminate it. I mean, I don't disagree with him. The folks who are going to be paying are the folks who can't even handle it, right? And so now you have to decide, do I pay this toll or do I feed my family, right? Another thing that's on the back of Americans.
Bradley, the question I ask, who sits around and come up with these ideas, and then these ideas become policy, and the policy become law? Who does this? Who can be so insensitive? Who do you have in mind when you implement these kind of policies that further burdensome the poor and the working class?
Armstrong, every time I come on your show, I know we're going to hit the heavy topics, but I don't think I've seen you as fired up about an issue than you are right now, because you are an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur. Of course, this doesn't make any sense for you. I'm joining you from Washington, D.C., where, people make their careers on this type of stuff, right? And the logic is the following. What we're going to do is enact policies that, as Mr. Paul was saying, with the wildfire situation, we're going to enact policies that increase the load, increase the burden on our social services and our communities. And then all of a sudden, when we hit our carrying capacity for those social services, oh no, we're out of money, oh no, we're out of space, oh no, we're out of this or that, someone comes along and says, well, that's very simple. Let's collect more funds and let's disperse those funds. And it's this vicious cycle, this bureaucratic, vicious cycle where these people collect more and more power unto themselves, where I think we can all agree, whether we're Democrats, Republicans, or independents, the number one call from the people right now is a return to common sense. I mean, folks can't manage their households like this, right? Small business owners can't manage their businesses like this. An employer can't handle or can't run their business like this and hope to provide people with good wages. And yet that's what our city governments, our state governments, and our national governments does on a regular basis. And so people are calling for a return to common sense. And what does that return to common sense look like? Oh, I don't know. Let's take some natural law principles, like don't punish those who are trying to better their lives, right? Don't punish those who are trying to climb the ladder, the economic ladder, the socioeconomic ladder, the cultural ladder, by getting a job, by maintaining a household. And I think that standard of decency and that return to common sense is what every American is craving for right now. So I'm glad to see that a lot of folks are speaking out against this insanity, because for far too long, I think the New York government has gotten away with highway robbery, whether that's through exorbitant taxes or that's through just the waste of taxpayer dollars, right? Like what services is New York's government providing its citizens these days? It seems like they can't keep people safe on public transit, and now you're forcing me there? None of it makes any sense.
Joe Paul, what is all of us here are entrepreneurs, and we know these are the kind of policies that backfires and drive businesses out of municipalities, out of jurisdictions. I mean, is there any realistic alternative that they could have addressed instead of this unfair congestion burdening everyday working class people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, one promising approach is investing in comprehensive public transit enhancements, right? These train and the safety. I mean, folks want to feel safe when they're leaving their houses, right? But New York can work on expanding bus, train routes, upgrading infrastructure to encourage more people to shift from cars to public transit. But they have to give them incentives, right? There have to be another alternative to incentivizing carpooling or ride sharing. There has to be some tax credits or toll discounts if you have more than one person in a car. I don't know, right? I don't have the answers, but I do know that they have a lot of work to do. The key is really striking a balance between reducing traffic and emissions while ensuring fairness and accessibility for everyone. I mean, I know if I have to pay more, I'm in the business to make money, right? To make a profit. And so if I have to spend more to make more, that the math ain't mathing, right? So yeah, it's going to drive a lot of businesses away if they really don't change and change fast.
I'm going to switch reels here a minute because Bradley is the political editor at the Daily Signal. We've been following very closely Steve Bannon's brutal attack on Elon Musk, especially as it involves the HB1 visa, where he thinks that it's a contradiction to where Trump was in his first administration, and that he thinks it only benefits Elon Musk and people like him in the long run. And a lot of these visas don't really help the U.S. economy, and it comes at the expense of displaced Americans where you can bring them in and they're going to make less noise about the working conditions and you're able to pay them less. But Bannon has made it clear that come the time that Trump is sworn in, that Elon Musk will be nowhere near any stretch of the imagination of influencing the president-elect. And listen, I remember during the days of Abraham Lincoln, Bradley, where he had this friction of minds and this conflict, and it made him better because not everybody was on the same page. And out of this conflict come better ideas, especially for governance. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really hope that Trump does channel Lincoln in that way. Previously on the show, we've talked about these diverse minds all coming together. And my take then was, it's great to have a diversity of thought in the room as you're trying to chart the course for a very diverse country, right? A very divided country. But at the end of the day, we need to have firm decision makers in firm places and have a unity of action, right? The deliberative process precedes the action. And as I look at this cast of characters that Trump is bringing in, Trump has done a good job at bringing in the coalition that got him elected, right? It was a multiracial working class coalition on the grassroots level. And then at the donor level, right? So you have the demos and then you have the aristocracy. we've seen a change in the guard in the Republican Party's donor class, which I never thought was going to be possible. You had the big Wall Street tycoons, those type of guys coming in and giving money to George W. Bush's campaign or whatever. But now it's a lot of Silicon Valley dissidents, a lot of tech bros, if you will, coming in and kind of investing money in the right. And I think Trump, by having people like Elon and Vivek who think this way on H-1B visas, and having Tom Homan, who's actually the head of the immigration policy in the White House, and Kristi Noem, who think, lowering H-1B visas or more immigration restrictionists, let's say, in the same room is hopefully going to make sure that the folks who got together to deliver the mandate win for Trump feel like all of their concerns have been heard and that they are reflected in the policy priorities. I think I saw this one coming from pretty far away. H-1B visas was a very clear fault line for this coalition. Why? Because this is just the nature of these industries, right? And if you're coming from the tech world, you want to protect your industry's interests. And if you're coming from, the MAGA base, that world, you've seen over the past 40 years, jobs leave this country. Whole cities deindustrialize, right? We call it the Rust Belt for a reason. And those jobs have gone elsewhere. And those were working class jobs. Well, everyone was told 30 years ago when this process started to go get a college education and make sure that you can do, not blue collar work, but white collar work. And you can rise the socioeconomic ladder by getting an education. And now, as we sit here in 2024, we have so many H-1B visas, so many different high-skilled visas coming in, where the promise of education leading to better socioeconomic outcomes is holding less and less true. And so a lot of Americans don't want to see our, up middle-class jobs, or what's left of our middle-class jobs, or our upper middle-class jobs go also overseas.
And that's exactly what they're just saying, Brad. Let me take a quick break, and I'll come back to Joe and Bradley. I'm Armstrong Williams, and it is your voice, your future.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
So Sam Donaldson and from Young Voices, and my man Sam Faddis, Mr. CIA operative, joins us. Let me start with you, Sam, because I've had this conversation before. I don't think you can talk about it enough. DEI is almost about to be buried. I mean, and what is fascinating about the death of DEI is that so many people that lauded DEI and supported are now saying it was the worst thing ever. I mean, look at Zuckerberg. I mean, look at people who were forces behind this, but he said it did more harm than good, and they were forced to hire people that were not qualified. It seems, though, that in the death of DEI, people don't want you to discriminate based on someone's race, based on someone's gender, but meritocracy should matter. What do you think about, particularly when it comes to the area that you often discuss on this show here, the foreign policy and the people you hire the best and brightest. Do you think that DEI has had a long-lasting impact on the culture of the military, on the culture of operatives like you were in the past and like you are in some ways now? Just what has it been its impact, and is it really over?
I think there's no question that it's had an impact, and the impact has been massive. It's not peripheral. It's not kind of subtle. It's around the edges, and it has become a huge issue. And so, yeah, without question, we have now a lot of folks that, to be blunt, are unqualified in positions. And you can say, okay, we're not going to continue giving people consideration like that going forward, but doesn't change the fact that you have folks now in the ranks who in many cases have acquired significant seniority who shouldn't have ever been there. So that's a painful process. And look, let me be clear here. I have zero patience for discrimination on the basis of any of these criteria. I mean, as I think I've said to you before, I don't care if I'm looking at a team filled with 6 straight white guys or 6 black gay guys or a gay girl. I don't care. They only care about one friggin' thing, which is, are you the best people, and are you the best folks, and are you actually getting your jobs done? And when you talk about something which, not just talk about life and death, you talk about the security of the country, there can't be any other standard, can there?
Andrew Donaldson, what are your thoughts on as we move forward? Can we recover from the damage of DEI? Or is it still needed in some ways, Andrew?
Sure, we can recover from it. It's like anything else. Any good idea that somebody has, there's nothing that a bureaucracy can't really mess up. And then when you put the cultural stuff on top of it, it messes up even further. And the real shame of the thing is it ends up actually hurting people that are trying to do things like diversity efforts in the first place. So something like the military, something like medicine, something, pick whatever is a can't fail thing. There's your good military term that kind of becomes an oxymoron. Pick whatever you want, but the people that get hurt is usually the people that actually do need a little bit of a diversity help. And the bureaucracy of it combined with the cultural thing makes a very toxic environment that makes everything 10 times worse than it should have been in the first place. Of course we can recover. These things usually come in pendulum swings. It'll swing back the other way. We're seeing that now where people are kind of moving away from it. We need to be careful it doesn't go too far the other way. There's a life cycle to these things, but remember, just kind of put a bookmark in it. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, it'll swing back again. And we'll do this all over again because human nature is undefeated, and this is really a human nature problem.
Sam, I was fascinated with your article in A&D about Greg Rotham, who wants to become chair of the Pennsylvania Republican Party. And you asked the question, is this the guy we want running the Pennsylvania GOP?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Armstrong, because I sort of got the lead to this story. And to be honest, as I'm sure will resonate with you, when I first heard about it, I thought, okay, I'm going to dig into this as usual and do due diligence. But I kind of expect there will be an innocent explanation and there won't be much of a story there. And about 5 minutes into it, I was blown away watching a video of this guy. I mean, he's a Pennsylvania state senator. He now wants to be Pennsylvania's chairman of the Republican Party. And for years now, he's been part of this organization called Engage Cuba, whose entire program is that we should drop all sanctions against the Cubans, end the blockade, take them off the list of state sponsors of terrorism, totally embrace them. And the list of organizations involved with this Engage Cuba is like a who's who of the most radical leftist organizations. I mean, as an example, Code Pink. Code Pink loves every communist country in the world. In fact, they think we're too mean to the North Koreans. They think North Korea's pretty cool and we ought to cozy up to them. That's the kind of bedfellows this guy Rothman, who wants to be the Republican GOP chair, has cultivated. And you don't need to infer it. I mean, again, in the article we wrote, we put the link to the whole YouTube video that's online where he's standing there laying this out, and behind him is a banner for the organization. One of the guys standing in the background as he's talking is a Cuban diplomat from their embassy. Now, if I had to bet, based on my previous life, I'd say he's not a real diplomat. I'd say he has other duties at the embassy, but I can't prove that. But in any event, it's mind-blowing that you got a prominent Republican state senator who wants to run the party in Pennsylvania, who thinks we're being too mean to the totalitarian regime in Havana.
You know, Andrew, Senate Democrats are urging outgoing Attorney General Merrick Garland to preserve evidence from Trump's investigations. Your thoughts?
It'll be a lot of waving. It'll be gnashing of teeth. It'll be loud. There'll be lots of news stories about it. It'll be sound and fury, basically signifying nothing. The verdict on the legal charges against President Trump, at least for now, has been rendered, and people did it in the election, and the judicial system has now scrambled to catch up. The people really don't mostly care. His opponents do, but it's not going to affect his presidency. It's not going to bring down his forthcoming presidency. He's not going to have significant legal ramifications, at least at this time. It's a lot of a nothing burger. I know people still want to cling to it, and they still want that narrative, and they still want that win, and they still want to chant convicted felon. It just ain't going to matter that much right now because we're on to Trump 2.0. There's a lot of resignation, and especially among a lot of our friends on the left right now, of, hey, this is going to happen. I don't think there's a big appetite for it. For posterity, sure, they'll record it, but I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot, especially in the next 9-10 months as we look at the legislative agenda that's getting ready to unfold before us.
Now, Sam, this is certainly something you've talked about for the longest. You're one of the first people to tell us that the Hunter Biden laptop was authentic, that the former intelligence officers who signed that letter did it from pressure from Blinken at the State Department, and that it would be proven to be true. It would be authenticated. It was. But you know what is interesting, Sam, is that the special counsel condemned the pardon and defended handling of the Hunter Biden investigation in his final report. After the Biden administration said it was a miscarriage of justice, and it was his Justice Department, and he stood firm and condemned the sitting president for the pardon.
Yeah, well, I'll be the cynical guy, not surprisingly, and say there are a lot of people now trying to position themselves after the fact in light of the election as taking the moral high ground. And I wish there had been one heck of a lot more of them that had the moral courage to stand up in the midst of this. I think we got to be really careful in sort of, you know, we don't need a revenge ride here where we just go after everybody who's on the Democratic side as a political opponent. We need to be very careful and sage. But I don't think we forget about what just happened, because what just happened threatened the foundations of the republic. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. When you start abusing the judicial system, law enforcement agencies, and intelligence agencies to go after your political opponents, you're now taking us down the path to, you're staring at the end of the republic, and we can't let that slide. So we need to clean this up, and I think there's still people that need to go to jail over what happened over the last few years.
This is Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Armstrong Williams. Andrew, Sam, and I will be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So, Sam, does Trump want to grab control of Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal?
Well, let's go in order, right? I think he is serious about Greenland in the sense of either acquiring it as a possession of the United States or working out some agreement. I mean, the bottom line is in Greenland, amongst other things, we're talking about a ton of rare earth minerals, which are incredibly valuable. And also, by the way, I mean, Greenland is run by Denmark, right? I mean, they have sort of self-rule, but it's a Danish province or territory or whatever. So it's not like Greenland at this point has complete self-rule anyway. In regard to Canada, I think he's just basically messing with Trudeau. In regard to the Panama Canal, I think he has a valid point. I mean, with all respect to the recently departed Jimmy Carter, in the sense that he was a very good man, he was an atrocious president. And what he did with the Panama Canal is of massive significance, because we had control over that strategic waterway and military forces there to guarantee that we retained access to it. And now, not so gradually, we're looking at the prospect of that strategic waterway being under the control of the Chinese, and we can't allow that. So, no, I don't think we're adding Canada as the 51st state. I wouldn't be surprised to see some kind of agreement with Greenland where it's not so much that politically we control it, but we do get access to the minerals. And I wouldn't be surprised to see something that at a minimum involves us putting a lot of significantly more military forces back into Panama so that nobody can occupy it or take it.
How successful can he be with any of these?
I think he can be very successful with all of those things. Now, depending on the exact agreement we strike with Greenland, it may be something that ends up being a treaty and has to go back to the U.S. Senate. But look, if you're talking about access to rare earth minerals in Greenland that are going to make American businessmen incredibly rich, and also, by the way, I mean, the real point is, from a strategic standpoint, right now the Chinese essentially control access to virtually all the world's rare earth minerals. So all those lithium batteries everybody wants to use depend on those minerals. So we're essentially giving the Chinese the leverage over us that we didn't want the Saudis to have with oil decades ago. We're putting ourselves under the control of the communist Chinese. So you go to the U.S. Senate and say, hey, look, this is a win-win. We're going to make a boatload of money and we're going to be a lot more secure. I don't think people are going to stand in that way. The question is, what does Greenland want for it, and those kind of things.
Andrew, salt water is corrosive and very damaging to the environment. So why are LA using sea water to battle the fires? They're scooping it out of the Pacific Ocean to battle the Palisades. Why? I find it fascinating.
Well, it is fascinating. Look, the entire history of California is one of the politics and warfare over water. You go all the way back to the Spanish colonial days of it. The whole history of California up until even this year. You can go look at the news stories from this spring, from the previous drought when they had record-setting rain back earlier last year. The history of water is the story of California. There's not enough of it. We need more. I lived in Las Vegas. Vegas and Nevada's mad because SoCal's taking all their water. This is a big deal. They're getting the salt water because they got to get the fire out. It's one of those things where it's like, well, this ain't good, but it's the least bad option we got to try to do it. And they've just got to try to get these fires under control for starters. But in the long run, it brings up the water infrastructure of SoCal has long been unsustainable. You put in government incompetence on top of it. This is not a a new issue. This is just the absolute worst, most horrific example of the water wars that have been going on for hundreds of years. And the local and state government of California has never gotten a good answer for that. The feds have made a mess of Western water all across the Western U.S. That's a bigger issue for later, talk about the Colorado River Basin and other places. Water is one of those things we don't talk enough about politics, but it has massive implications. This is just a really bad example of it that we really ought to use to try to talk about it in a productive way.
Talking about the water, what is necessary to the issues you just addressed going forward? Because nature's volatility is not going to get any better.
No, it's not. And proper conservation would fix a lot of this. Notice I said conservation, not environmentalism. Those are two different things. I am a conservationalist. If you take care of the environment in a working way to take care of things like irrigation, like farm, like taking care of the actual drinking water that we need, there's no excuse for California to not be 20, 30, 40 years into their nuclear programs. There's no excuse for them to not be 40 or 50 years into desalinization programs like we have in other parts of the world. They've drugged their feet on this, and a lot of it was over environmental activist concerns, which runs counter to proper conservationism, right down to things like proper brush cleaning and counter fire prevention measures like controlled burns to take care of some of these fire issues. Now, there's nothing you can do about a 90-mile-an-hour wind. You could have 20,000 firefighters. You can't fight that. But there's protectionism. There's things you can do ahead of time and after. And water's another one of those things. If you properly conserve it and use it and do it in a way with some competent government, it wouldn't be this bad. And I doubt they're going to do it, but I would like for them to take this as an opportunity to make it better going forward.
Sam, we have the inauguration a week from the day. Crowds, record number of people will be gathering in Washington, D.C. We have playoff games in Buffalo, New York, and Detroit, Michigan, and Arizona tonight. We have the college football championship the same night of the inauguration. You know, when I think about the specific security measures that were in place on Bourbon Street during the New Year's celebrations, and as we were preparing for the Sugar Bowl, how did one perpetrator, manage to circumvent them? And what does it tell us about where we have big crowds going forward?
Look, I think the Bourbon Street attack tells you the same thing that both assassination attempts on President Trump tell you, which is there was nothing particularly sophisticated about any of those three events. Any competent protective service or police service in New Orleans acting competently, led competently, could easily have defeated those threats, right? I mean, up in Pennsylvania when Trump almost died and was actually struck in the ear, you're talking about apparently a really emotionally disturbed kid with no training and a rifle who climbs on a roof. This is like the most basic training exercise in the world for a protective detail. And the U.S. Secret Service, which is supposed to be the world's best, failed catastrophically. Bourbon Street. The guy drove down a side street, turned onto Bourbon Street, and drove around the police vehicle blocking Bourbon Street because their bollards, their metal posts that are supposed to be blocking the street were not in place. And he got around the vehicle because he drove up on the sidewalk. Now, I want you to think about that. You're a police force. You're concerned about a terrorist threat. You're aware of the possibility of somebody driving a vehicle down to run people over or has a car bomb. So you block the road. But it's never entered your mind that that terrorist who's getting ready to commit mass murder would also violate a traffic rule and drive his car on the sidewalk. Because that's what that boils down to. Now, afterward, there's a lot about they had devices to put on the sidewalk, and the chief of police didn't realize they had them, and apparently that's all true. But there are a lot of other people between the chief of police and the guy who parked that car, that police car, who had to be just phoning it in, for lack of a better way to describe it, in terms of being serious about the threat, because anybody with any degree of intelligence on the police force would have looked at every place they did that and said, what's the plan when they drive around the car? So You talked about all of these events, the Super Bowl, everything else. If you see the evidence that we're actually getting serious with this threat, you're seeing something that I don't see. I mean, our in addition to the politicization that we started off by talking about, we got a competency crisis here. We got major services that are supposed to do things that apparently can't perform anymore.
Andrew, are we sitting ducks?
We are when we have incompetent leadership in things like law enforcement and local government, which is what you saw here. Look, car-borne and truck-borne attacks are not new. We've seen quite a few of them in Europe. We've seen a few of them here in the U.S., and you have seen it. I've been to festivals here in the U.S. in various places. I was in Chicago for the Christmas market a couple of years ago. They did this. You have salt and gravel trucks blocking off streets. You can have a garbage truck. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You can use the assets a local government already has to physically block off a street. And remember, something like Bourbon Street, there's parts of it that are really wide, but the part where he was, it's basically almost little more than a one-lane alleyway. There wasn't a lot of room. It's a miracle more people. One good-sized truck could have blocked off that portion of that street, and you see it in other places. It's especially egregious and inexcusable in New Orleans, which is a year-round destination. They're saying, well, we were fixing the bollards for the Super Bowl. You have the Sugar Bowl every year on the same day. And New Year's is a big thing in the South. All through the winter, the South goes to New Orleans to party. It's always like this. It's inexcusable, and New Orleans has a long history of incompetent and corrupt government, and you're seeing that. So if your local government is corrupt and your local police is not held to account, yeah, you're a sitting duck, and it's your government's fault, but we have representative democracy, so if we're not holding them accountable year-round, we shouldn't expect them to be accountable during a crisis, and that's what you're seeing. That's why we're sitting ducks. We don't want to do the prep work ahead of time to have competent people in office. We just want to go, I can't believe they did this horrible thing. Well, we got to put them in ahead of time, have good people in there before the crisis comes, because then it's too late.
You know, Sam, we have about 45 seconds left. It is a fact. What is more important than law enforcement to stop these acts are bystanders.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to have people participating. I mean, in those situations where the bystanders can tell us something and provide that information 100%. When it is a threat that they can see and give us time to react to, that is critical.
You know, I want to thank Bradley Devlin, Joe Paul, Andrew Donaldson, and of course, Sam Faddis for joining us and giving us his insights and make us think that the government and law enforcement may have well intentions, but listen, you need to watch, say something, do something, and act immediately when something's not right. I'm Armstrong Williams. Good night from your voice, your future. Town Hall.